We are in the life of Paul. We are in Acts chapter 27. We are where Paul is on a ship, and all those with him, with the centurion, with Luke, all those, and the other prisoners and sailors and all, they are on a ship, and they have been caught in a Euroclydon, which is a terrible storm. That is the term that was used in those days, in the first century. And it concerned the Mediterranean, and it was a nor'easter, which is a terrible event if you are at sea. It's not pleasant if you're at land either, but it's not so much life-threatening if you're on land. But it brings in heavy winds. You bring in heavy winds on an ocean, you're going to get big waves, and you're going to get ships that are going to be tossed to and fro, which is what's going to happen here. And they had been harbored for a little bit before the Euroclydon came. Things were already getting bad weather-wise. They had gone to a place called Fair Havens, which was in Cyprus. There were those there that did not want to winter at Fair Havens because, for whatever reason, it wasn't suitable for that. So the idea is, we get fair weather, let's go. And at least we can get to Phoenix. Phoenix, which is also the southern coast of Cyprus, they could go there. It's only 45 miles away. So they could easily get there in a day. Only 45 miles away, they could anchor there for the winter, and it's a better place to be for the winter. Well, Paul gave a warning. He sensed that something bad he perceived there's going to be loss of ship and possible loss of lives in all this, and he warns them not to go. And there is basically a vote in it. The owner is going to say, go. The helmsman is going to say, all is well. And most of the others are okay, especially when there is a day that it begins pleasant enough. There is a wind from the south. Things have calmed down. It could very well now be a beautiful sunny day. And so they set off to go to at least Phoenix. If things get rough, they will go to Phoenix. So they set off, and then the words are, the ship was caught. Things get very bad, and the Euroclydon comes, and the ship cannot make it to Fair Havens. The ship is being pushed further and further away from Crete. And they are afraid they're going to be pushed right into what in verse 17 is called the Syrtis sands. Those are large sandbars off the coast of Africa. There's a couple of them. And they are less than 200 miles from North Africa. That is from the coastline of Africa. Now, exactly where those Syrtis sands are off the coast, I'm not sure, but that would make it a little bit closer than the actual coastline. But they are less than 200 miles. When they're at Crete, it's a 200-mile journey, and you will be right there at the coast of North Africa. And they're afraid. In verse 17, they struck sail and so were driven. What does it mean to strike sails? It means there was no point in having those sails at all. They just collapse them, wrap them up, and let themselves be driven. Because as we mentioned last week, two things can happen when you have immense winds and you have full sails out. One is the sails can just get shredded and they're useless now. The other is even worse, of where the mast is broken and now you don't have mast or sails. And someone can be killed depending on the size of the mast, obviously. Someone can be injured, we'll just put it that way, as the thing comes snapping down. So they allow it to be driven, which means they're not steering. There's no point in steering at all, because they're just being pushed by waves, is what's happening. The wind is too fierce. And we come to verse 18. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. So this is day 2. Day 2. Day 1 looks great, but they're out, they get caught, they can't get back to land. They can't get back to any kind of shelter. They're caught, and they're going to be caught for 2 weeks. All right? They are caught in this. And the next day, they're going to lighten the ship. Okay, so this is the beginning of their desperation. To begin with, they're going to obviously get rid of things they don't really need. It's not necessary for survival. It's not necessary for any kind of profit that this may have. They're not that desperate just yet, but they're going to lighten the ship, and it would be things you don't have to have on the ship, and they've got to lighten it. You get a lighter ship, and it's not going to be so heavy in the water and less likely to sink. And you just have this heavy object in the water that you're now trying to lighten up. Okay, they're exceedingly tempest-tossed. All right, now personally, I've never been seasick, but even experienced sailors can get seasick, or at least, maybe they're not throwing up, at least the fact is they don't want to eat, and it's too difficult to cook anyway. If you're going to cook, you just have to eat things that don't have to be cooked. And so we're going to get to a point where they're not eating anymore. And if you're exceedingly tempest-tossed, it's difficult to do anything if that's the case. All right, so verse 19. On the third day, so this is the third day now, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, who is saying that? No, Luke is saying that. Luke is the one writing this. Luke is saying that. And because what is Luke by profession? He's a doctor. He's a physician. All right, how many physicians do you know are experienced sailors? I mean, there may be some, a Navy doctor, sure. But he's saying with our own hands. He's not a sailor. And they're either volunteering help or they're being asked, could you please help us? Because it is getting more desperate here. When you are asking others on the ship to lighten the load, you're getting desperate. You're definitely getting desperate. Because in the first part, it says, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we were involved in this, and it's the ship's tackle. Okay, the ship's tackle is not necessary for survival. It's not food, it's not water. It doesn't hurt the ship in any way to get rid of it. But it is weight, and they got to get rid of that. So what is ship's tackle? Well, it would be ropes and pulleys and other hardware that's used to either load or unload the ship when it's at harbor. That's what that is. Now, how much weight would that be? Well, I wouldn't know. But evidently it's enough to get rid of it and enough to employ others, non-sailors, to help throw it overboard. And it's going to help lighten the load. So here we are on the third day, and we've now gone from tossing minor stuff now to less minor stuff, throwing that overboard with our own hands, and now you're employing people that aren't the sailors. They don't get paid for this. Now, verse 20. Now, look at this. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. So, here is many days. Okay? There's neither sun nor stars. It's nothing but very thick cloud. And they're at sea. They don't know where they're going. They can't know. The word would be featureless. It's just ocean, 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 and gray for sky. That's it. They can't know which way's east or west. They don't see the stars. They don't know where they are heading. And you could just think of it this way. If someone took you into like the middle of a gymnasium and turned off all the lights and then spun you around for 3 days and then said, okay, stopped you and say, which direction are you pointing? Well, you wouldn't know. You would have no idea which way, aside from being sick, you'd have no idea where you were pointing. And they don't know. It is just gray and more gray. If they had something like a coastline, they could know, okay, that's that direction, whatever direction that is. And in having some kind of experience or some kind of maps, which they did have maps, they could give their best guess as to what that land feature was. They can give their best guess. But that would also represent safety too. But they couldn't get there even if they wanted to. They were already by Crete. They were already by Crete and couldn't get to Crete. All right? And so, if I said Cyprus earlier, I meant Crete. Those are easily changed in my mind. But they started off in Crete. They're trying to get back to Crete. Okay, now they don't know where they are. And it's been many days that no one has been able to take any kind of navigational point to know where they are. And with a skilled navigator, it wouldn't take very long for one to have a good indication as to where they might be. But that's a skilled navigator, and I'm not sure in those days if they, on this particular ship, if they would have everything they would need at that point in time. But no small tempest, it is just relentless. It won't stop. Verse 21, but after a long abstinence from food, yet not only could you not cook, you don't want it either. You're just being pounded all the time. Then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, so here we have Paul's speech to them. And they're not on the deck. I have a feeling they're not on the deck at all. Not on the top. That they're inside somewhere. And he's going to be speaking to them. And this is his speech. And as we have said concerning Paul's speeches in the book of Acts, we always have something surprising that we didn't get before. There's always something there that we didn't get. He's saying something that for us may be very new in this. But he's going to start with his position of having been right, because he's the one that said, don't leave Fair Havens. He's the one that told them, don't do it, that he perceived. And that perception, I still believe, was from his experience, that it wasn't that of inspiration at all, or a message from an angel or anything like that. He's going to get one And that's what he's about to tell them. But this is not a message he got when he was at Fair Havens. This is one he got in the night right there. This night, he's going to say. Okay? But after a long abstinence from food, so how many days, we don't know, but it's a total of 2 weeks in this mess. After a long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. You would have been better off." So he's starting from that position. And yes, you have some who are on that boat who are now trusting Paul more and more. The centurion is. We know he is. And he's the one who has the final say on that board, not the owner, not anybody else. He's the one that has the final say. And so he says, "I warned you." Verse 22. Now he's going to tell them the good news. "And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship." Okay, so there's going to be the loss of ship, but everyone's going to survive. Well, how do you know that? Okay, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, he's going to tell them in the next sentence. "For there stood by me this night." So this is still nighttime, and everybody's up. Everybody is in one spot, and he's talking to them all. All right? "There stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve." So, for some of them, they would already know who that is. For someone like the centurion and others, even some of the prisoners, they would have been with Paul for a while now, going all the way back to when they left Caesarea, that they would know who that happened to be. And they would know that he is a disciple of Jesus of Nazareth, who is referred to as, by some, as the Messiah, as the King of the Jews, as the one who began the way, or as some called it back in, it was Tertullus who called it the sect of the Nazarenes. All right, they know who that would be. He says, "To whom I belong and to whom I serve," saying, so the angel came, saying, verse 24, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar." That goes right back to what Christ told him in chapter 23:11. That you are testifying, you have testified in Jerusalem, now you're going to testify in Rome, a place he had never been before. Okay? And it's confirming that this is precisely what's going to happen. And as we made mention last week, I don't think for a moment that Paul forgot what Christ told him. Or that somehow Christ saying, "You're going to testify in Rome," would fail. That he would die in the process of getting him to Rome. I think that Paul very well knew, especially with what he's about to say, that Paul very well knew, regardless of what happened or what happens to anybody else, he will make it to Rome. Luke may die because there's not that assurance to Luke. Aristarchus may die because there's not that assurance given to Aristarchus. Not from what Christ said in chapter 23. It wasn't pointed to either of them. But now we have a message that's more specific. No one's going to die. There will be no loss of life in this disaster, but it's going to be the ship. The ship is going to be the thing that is lost before this. And notice verse 24 again. "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar." That is a definite. You are going to be in front of Caesar, and Christ is going to make sure that it happens. All right. Now, once again, the centurion knows where Paul's supposed to be going. It means the sailors wouldn't necessarily know, but the centurion and those other soldiers and the other prisoners would know exactly where Paul is supposed to be going, and that he will be seeing Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all, notice in this, and indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So everyone is going to live, but notice the wording. God will grant you. Or God has granted you. We made mention last week that He had a concern for everyone on that ship. He could have the attitude, that self-satisfied attitude of, I'm going to be spared. I don't know about you, but I'm going to be spared. Okay? Good luck for you, but Christ is going to take me all the way to Rome. Now, just as an aside in this, met a man a number of years ago, and I'm not going to go all into what he was religiously. I'm not going to go into that. But by way of his belief, he thoroughly believed he was saved and thoroughly believed I could never be saved. Thoroughly believed it. That there was a select group who could be saved, of which he was, in his belief, was one. But if you were outside that group, no way. You weren't selected. You are of a different sort. You could never be saved regardless of what you do. Regardless. And he seemed satisfied by that. And that's what really shook me, is he seemed satisfied. And just that, I have no concern for you because I know you're condemned regardless of what you do. I'm saved, you're not, nor will you ever be. All right? And that shook me as being one, heartless, very heartless, and rather arrogant. And do we have a Creator who's that heartless? Well, we don't. Now, we look at what Paul is doing. Granted to you, all those who sail with you. That means, that implies Paul's been praying for them as well. He's not praying for his own safety and for his friends. Obviously, he would want Luke and Aristarchus. He'd want them spared in all this. And the rest, who cares? No, he's praying for them too. It's obvious he's been doing that because it says that God has granted you all those who sail with you. Something's been granted because something's been asked. You don't grant something, at least not in my thinking, unless something has actually been asked. And now verse 25. Therefore, here's the conclusion in this, therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. All right, now he's saying this because what's going to happen next, what he's about to tell them next, that everything I was told by God is going to happen. Everything. And I want to read that again. I believe God that it will be just as it was told to me. Nothing is going to be out of this, of what God said. Nothing is going to be missing from it. Nothing. But he's saying it at this point in his speech. He's saying it now because of what he's about to say and what it does imply. Because it does imply something. Verse 26 begins with, however. Now that, however, does not mean there's something he doesn't believe with God. The however is, here's the bad news. The good news is you're going to survive. The however is, and it's not bad news so much as it is something they must remember and take note. However, we must run aground on a certain island. That actually implies something. It's more than just the ship is going to run aground. He says we must run aground on a certain island. Let's talk about the certain island just for a moment. Certain island means he wasn't given that information as to where that would be. He's not told. That's not so important at this moment. He's not told where it is. But when he said we must run aground, that means you got to be in the ship when it runs aground. That's precisely what that's implying. That if you jump, you didn't run aground. The ship did, but you didn't. If you try to get off on a skiff, you didn't run aground. You went by way, you were on a skiff. All right? That's not the must here. The must is, that oughtness. That must is something that is to happen. He believes God. We must run aground on a certain island. The implication is you got to be in the ship when that happens. That's the implication. This must happen. Verse 27. Now when the 14th night had come, so that's 2 weeks since they left Fair Havens and have been in this storm. This would get tiring, incredibly tiring. Having to sleep in all this, trying to anyway. You can't really eat very well, and as we will see, they're told they need to eat. And it's relentless. It keeps going. When the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. All right, it's about midnight, so it's dark. They can't see anything. They can't see a thing. They sense it. How do they sense it? Well, I think the only way they could sense it is they're hearing something. There's the basic sound of the ocean. They've been hearing that. There's the basic sound of the creaking of the ship. They've been hearing that. But I think they hear something else that they are very much accustomed to hearing as sailors. And that is when water is breaking, water hitting breakers. Water's breaking against rocks. And the sound of a shoreline. That's a different sound. And they're hearing that. They sense they're getting closer to land. And now, all right, how shallow is the water? If we're getting closer to land, how close are we? How close, what danger are we in at this moment? So they sense they're getting close to land. Verse 28, and they took soundings. Okay, now what is a sounding? A sounding, and you've seen it in movies before, it's where they take a rope has a weight on it, they lower the rope has knots in it at certain distances, and they can measure the depth of the water that they're in. Now when you're in an ocean or at sea, that's going to be deep. All right, it's very deep. But this is for when you suspect you're getting into very shallow water. Okay, so they need to know how shallow is the water where we are right now. So, and they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. Okay, so what is that equivalent to? That's 120 feet is what that's equivalent to. So, I mean, you can think 120 feet, that's pretty deep, but as far as the sea is concerned, it's not. That's not very deep at all when you're talking about a sea. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. That's now 90 feet. It's been reduced. They're getting into shallower and shallower water. All right? Now they know they're going to run aground, but that doesn't mean be careless. And they're not going to be careless. They need to know. They need to know. And for someone like Paul, this is something you're not going to be able to stop. You can't stop it. You shouldn't want to stop it, because this is actually how you're going to be saved out of this. You're going to be getting to land. Is that not your goal? To get the land. That is the goal. All right, so verse 29, then fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, which that's what were told was going to happen. All right, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. All right, so we're going to do this bit by bit. They fear that they're going to run aground to rocks. Well, what did Paul say the angel told them? They're going to run aground on rocks. Okay, they're going to run aground. That's what's going to happen, but no one's going to die in this. They drop 4 anchors. So, dropping 4 anchors means you're seriously being driven heavily. You usually think of dropping anchor as dropping 1 anchor, and that would be, I suppose, when things are calm. But they're being pushed right into where they don't want to be pushed. And so they drop 4 anchors from the stern, is just the back of the ship, is where they dropped it. And the anchors in the Roman days, we'd recognize them. They don't look, they have the same basic shape that we think anchors should have. It's usually, with 2 hooks on it. Maybe slightly different shape, but you'd recognize that as being an anchor. And so they put down 4 off the back, and they're going to pretend to put another one off at the front. But we'll get to that in a second. They dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. Now here is the thing concerning sailors. You get, just like with Jonah, in the events of Jonah, great winds bring great waves, and great waves bring fear, and fear means you've got some sailors who are suddenly religious. And they're praying now for day to come. Why would they pray for day to come? So they could see where they are. How close are they? What can they do at this point? And one of the things would be, are we close enough to where we can let down the skiff and get out of here? Because that's what they're going to try to do. You've got sailors who are going to try to do that, and they're not going to invite anybody else to come along. Okay, now because they're going to be doing this in the next verse, verse 30. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea under pretense of putting out anchor from the prow. That's the front. So they're pretending, and it's the sailors doing this. And they're the ones that know what needs to be done with the ship, and they know all the ins and outs of their ship. They go to the prow pretending, I guess they would just say it out, we're gonna lower anchors from the prow. They go to the prow and they're letting down the skiff. Paul sees this. Now, they intended to escape. They're doing this secretively, which means it's obvious. They understood the message, we must run aground. They understood that message, and they weren't going to stay on the ship. They were not going to do it. They're going to try their luck on the skiff, is what it is. Verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, they're the ones with the swords and the armor. All right, not the sailors. They're the ones very skilled at pointing swords at people and killing. They are very accustomed to that. He tells the centurion and the soldiers, notice what he says, unless these men stay on the ship, you cannot be saved. Now he's telling that to the centurion and the soldiers. He's telling it to them, not just those sailors. He's telling it to them. You've got to stop them from doing that, because we have to remain on this ship. That's what we must do. And this is where we see the centurion must fully trust Paul at this point, because he's not going to join the sailors with the skiff. And understand, the sailors didn't intend on anybody else being in that skiff. You stay with the boat if you want to. You stay with the ship if you want to. We're gone. We'll see what happens from the shore. Now, so Paul gives this warning to the centurion, very clear language. You can't be saved if these men leave the ship. Verse 32, then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. So that's that. The skiff is now gone. There's no retrieving that. They put an end to it. They didn't haul it back up for that to happen again. And there really is no need to. There's no need to save anything on this ship except human life. There's no need to. Just let that thing go. You're not going to need it. Get rid of it. And this is, I tell you, this is full obedience. They take him seriously. If there were any doubts, they'd just get in the skiff themselves. That's what they would do. Verse 33, and as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. So they've been without food for a while. And he tells them, you've got to eat. And this goes right into not just the fact that food couldn't be cooked in all this, is that you just didn't want it. You did not want it. Even with experienced sailors, you just didn't want it. And now he's telling them, please take food. He said, therefore, verse 34, therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any one of you. You're not going to be harmed at all, but you need to eat. You're not going to lose a hair. You're not going to be bruised. You're not going to be cut. You're not going to be drowned. You're not going to die. You're going to be wet, but everything is going to be safe. Everything is going to be okay. But you have to listen to him. Verse 35, and when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. This is giving glory to God. He's already given glory to God by mentioning the angel, and that the angel is from the God that he serves. The God to whom I belong, he's a servant of Christ. He belongs to Christ. And now he gives thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken, he began, when he had broken it, he began to eat. And so he's going to do this. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. So they're encouraged by it. They're encouraged by what, there's a tremendous bravery and faith on Paul's part. Very much so. And they take encouragement in this, in that, it's getting rid of that skiff. That could be murder now. You got rid of that skiff. We now kill somebody. Okay, Paul may be number one, but they're not. They now take encouragement in this, and he's telling them everything is going to be okay. Nothing is going to be harmed about your person. Ship, yes. Cargo, yes. You, no. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't this kind of like Noah and the ark? They had to be on the ark
yes.
to be safe, and that's what God told them.
This is a parallel. This is you could think of it as shadowing in this, but a parallel of where with the Noah, his family, and the ark. You got to be on that ark to survive the flood. Here are these. It is a direct command. You got to stay on that ship. Now, unlike the ark, this ship is going to wreck, but everybody's going to be okay. And it is all by your obedience to the words of God. Even when it doesn't make sense to you, even when things are really, really frightening, that he's saying stay on the boat, he means stay on the boat. And at this point, where hope had been lost earlier, verse 20, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. That would concern the sailors and the soldiers and the other prisoners. That would concern them, but it wouldn't concern Paul. Now they are encouraged in this. They have eaten something and they are encouraged. And we will have to continue this next week. They will be shipwrecked in Malta. And in that 2-week period, from them leaving Crete to wrecking in Malta, that's 500 miles they have gone in that. They have been pushed that way. It wasn't wind and sails that did it. Because they struck those down the second day. It's just being battered about and pushed that direction. And Malta is going to be basically due south of Italy. And so they are going in a helpful direction, that's for sure. And but we'll continue next week. I want to thank everybody for being with us. And hopefully we can continue with this shipwreck next week. Thank you.